one thing that we discussed yesterday that I think may play into like discovering out how to deal with this meta is kind of the scrim culture that we have present in EU. Now, I don't think anyone's ever brought it up in a positive light, sadly to say. It's never like, yes, this is the best. Teams are performing. But Deficio, I know this is something that you wanted to discuss specifically with Yamato.
Yeah, it's because yesterday on the analyst desk we had Alfari and Maxlore, and they were talking about how in Europe in 2017 we still have these issues where some games end at 10 minutes. It's just FF. It's rare you actually play all the way to the Nexus, basically exploding. Teams can still sometimes cancel scrims due to just bad environment. And as a coach, I just want to hear your perspective on this because it almost feels like at this point the scene should be professional enough to say 6 hours of focus each day should be required from a player. Why do you think it's so difficult for people to keep it cool and just not have these problems in scrims?
I don't know, like from my side, I try to keep a standard and set a standard that I expect from enemies. Usually what we do, like if we think at 10 minutes, let's say we did a dive top lane, we have Elise and Ekton, we get double killed, we try again, we get double killed again, and all of a sudden, you know, the game is pretty much over on paper, right? Similar to the UL game. In that sense, what I try to do is extend the hand towards the enemy team. Do you want to finish this game or do you want to pretty much FF? And that is the kind of precedent that I'm trying to set. Also with cancelling, usually it depends on who you scrim against because there's like the scrim privilege going on. There's this thing where obviously the better teams are going to be the ones that pick who you scrim against. And the teams that I consider like A-tier scrim partners, I try to treat even better than the ones that are below us in that sense on the scrim tier list, because that's just how it works in the end. Like if we're scrimming, let's say G2 for example, then if they're 10 minutes late, we're the ones apologizing pretty much, you know. That's just how it works.
Prettiest girl at the prom kind of scenario. You don't get to be picky, sadly, I think, for Vitality, but I imagine it's pretty good when you're the top team getting to pick who you scrim against. Is it difficult at all to find these scrim partners? Do you ever have to take less than ideal scrim partners, people who maybe aren't the most professional? You know, obviously don't want you to name names here, but just like, is there enough professional scrim partners in EU that you could theoretically go a week without having any cancels, without having any, let's say, bad-mannered FFs when you obviously it's not in your interest to do so?
Yeah, obviously I have a preference, right? And that's not going to be always fulfilled. Like we're a fourth-place team in our group. We don't have this luxury, right? So we try to get the most out of it. But sometimes there are cases where cancels happen because of genuine reasons, right? Someone slipped down the stairs and broke his ankle and has to be sent to the hospital, right? These things happen, and it has happened on my end as well. And this is also important to remember that these things happen sometimes. And when it comes to these cancellations because of internal issues, I think this is something that shouldn't be done at all. I think this is a bad way to do it. But sometimes teams tend to also lie to just look in a better light. Like, oh, our guy just slipped and broke his ankle, and then you see him walking down the street with a popsicle in his hand, you know.
He was pretty fast.
Yeah, he was pretty fast, pretty much.
But do you think right now that the European scrim culture is good enough to really improve as a region? Or do you think it's still holding teams back?
I think it becomes what you make of it. Like some of the coaches, I speak very openly with them. I try to tell them, oh, this is how we want it. And if they have issues with how we scrim, I try to be open to them as well. I think we are the ones that have it in our hands. I think complaining about it does nothing. In the end, that you have an opportunity to affect your own scrims, right? And I think that's where you have to start.
Yeah, and I mean, the reason I feel so strongly about this is because Season 3, like 2013, when Yamato and myself, we were pro gamers.
Oh God, issues, God help us, never again.
I know, that was a long time ago. It was a sad state for Europe. But back then, we had the same issues with scrims. People were late, people would cancel, people would FF early in the games, or they would just tilt, and the last 2 games were useless. And then I always had this hope that, now that the scene is more professional, the European scene is growing, there's coaches now. We didn't have coaches back then, or didn't like one random guy here and there. So I kind of figured, okay, now it's going to work because, you know, as a team, you're going to sit down and say, okay, guys, we're currently 4th place in our group. We're currently not improving. What is something we can do different? Maybe we should really try and super try hard in these scrims. I'm not saying it's Vitality specifically, but like as an example. Yeah. And then they set an example maybe for other teams, and everyone kind of realizes, oh yeah, this is our job. You know, the best way to improve is through the practice, and that is by being try hard in this practice. I understand it can be difficult sometimes to keep the focus, but that should be obviously the mindset for professional players. It's something we hear about the LCK teams all the time, how they are able to get more out of their scrims than other regions.
I'm curious, very often we bring this up, there's often a discussion where we bring it back to sports like football, to other more traditional things, and why is it that they're able to, at least from my knowledge of practices, able to have more professional practices more reliably, even when they are, scrimmaging in off-season, than we are as League of Legends players or any other esport?
Isn't it just a big difference? Like Echo Fox are doing this thing where they're only scrimming the sister team,
Sure.
right? It's just that usually, like if I'm in a position where I have my team and we're scrimming a different team, it's very, very hard to force yourself upon the other team, right? They also have, like, you're holding hands, and if they want to let go, you have to just let go, right? In that kind of sense, metaphorically speaking. They have a responsibility too, and sometimes you can't affect that, right? And I think as we proceed, hopefully, like my imagination, like 5 years from now, I have a 10-man roster that we can just scrim within, and this is something that would be more beneficial because you can do focused, targeted training. And usually in scrims, it's just rinse and repeat, pretty much.
I think a large part in professional sport is also the competition for your spot, your starting spot, being it, American sports or Europeans. Like, these professional players have gone from a young age. They've been some of the best. They've constantly had to train and work really hard to maintain that level. That has then moved into them being a young player on a new team, being it in the NFL or whatever, Premier League, Champions League, these kind of things in football where you want to perform against the best. Because if you don't perform, there's another guy right behind you who's going to take your spot. And I think in League of Legends, I'm just talking Europe right now, very few teams have subs that they can utilize. There is basically no pressure right now on a player to always perform in practice. Because what is Yamato going to do right now? Is he going to threaten to just kick the guy straight away and just find a random solo queue player and bring him in? That might happen at some point, but it doesn't happen quickly. So you have a lot of time where there can actually be people feeling like they can't really get touched in their position. And I think the 10-man roster is a good thing because then suddenly you can be like, yeah, if you're not taking this game seriously, we have a sub mid laner who can play the next 3 games. And this guy might actually take it super serious to win the starting spot. And suddenly you have way more competition. So you can actually start enforcing people to really show up in every practice game to make sure they are the starting player on that lineup. And that might be what's required. There needs to be more pressure on people to constantly perform for them to take it seriously in every single practice game.
Do you think that's fair to say?
I think, it's been said a lot that fear is the strongest motivator, right? And I think it speaks a lot also in this case that if you actually care about what you have, an opportunity, and you have a bunch of people lining up behind you, then you will do everything you can to seize it. Otherwise, you just get pushed away and moved on, right? It's the similar situation like SKT have the thing going on where they just, whenever a player doesn't seem to be on par, I don't know what's going on in SKT, right? But I'm just imagining. This is
they have subs. They use their subs very aggressively.
They just get in there, You're not going to play for 3 weeks because this is what he's better than you right now, and this is motivating, right?
Yeah, exactly. There's a bunch of guys in solo queue who's coming up who might also take your spot. We know a lot of the LCK teams have some of these like training lineups. Basically, it was one of the ways Huni got discovered back in the day, where he was on SKT's training lineup, and he was obviously trying to show his best every single time, so that SKT would put him in the starting lineup. That didn't happen though, but Fnatic instead ended up picking him up. He obviously came over to Europe, so. Funny enough, if you try hard and you really want to win and you really want to improve, most likely you're going to succeed and you will get a starting spot then. And I think we probably need more players. We need more competition for it to really level up to the next level. I think North America is doing a little bit more. We see more subs coming in from them that can be utilized, and it might benefit them a lot in the long run.
So what's the next step then for Europe? You say North America is already getting there. Is it just more structure, maybe more money coming into teams?
Probably more money for more players so they can have, more people on the roster.
But like right now, if let's say you can buy 5 players, Vitality, whatever team you want, is there 5 players on a list that you're like, those 5 guys, solo queue, challenger team. You have a list. Okay, so is this something that if you just had boom instantly an extra X dollars to buy 5 players that you think that you could build this 10-man team where you could scrim against each other and start pressuring players for their roles?
I think the main thing is that right now acquiring a player always comes with risks, right? You acquire a player, he has a personality. You don't know. Let's say he never played in the competitive team before. He's playing well in solo. It's always a risk. There's a lot of question marks, right? And I think what Europe can do to move further and remove these question marks is we just need more competition. We just need more competition all over the place. And I think if you look over at North America, they have this university thing going on where they compete against each other. Players got exposed there. Like I think Zig from P1 was one of those players. And I think more competition, it clears away these question marks and you can pick up more players. Because it's the same thing in traditional sports. Like it's the youth leagues, it's the young players over in colleges. They are the ones that get picked up by the big teams.
Do you think the national leagues in Europe right now are good enough to kind of scout for talent? Because we've seen some players come from the national leagues into LCS.
But that's definitely a good way. I think like the players, I think some of the Giants players that play in EUCS right now are very, very impressive. And they're the ones that played in the Spanish league. I think so, at least. I'm not going to, don't quote me on this.
Quote him.
But definitely, like more competition clears away these question marks. And all of a sudden you will see these gems and they will be brought up and pushed up forward.
But definitely also the money part is important for some of the organizations. Like it's just not feasible right now to sign 10 players, have 10 players in a massive gaming house or 2 different gaming houses. And then you have scrims with each other. And also the fact you can sub in these guys again to put more pressure on your starting players. Like that is just not possible, I think, for some of the organizations right now in Europe. And of course, that is part of why they don't do it. I think if everyone had the money and the staff to do it, they would, because it makes you a better team to have more competition in your lineup, but it comes with a cost.
Definitely does. Well, this has been a fantastic conversation. I'm going to put a cap on it here, though, because we do have more EULCS in the week, though. I hope we can keep it going in the future. Tomorrow.